Again, if you'll just go on mute as you come in the room, we'll get started here. I thank everybody. My name again is Marty McIntyre, Member Services for the CMA. I thank everybody for joining us. We've got a great presentation. We've been looking forward to this all week. Coming at you today from Nielsen, from Trax, and from Nielsen, Matt Holland, leader of North American, VP Commercial Leader of North American from Trax, Patty Gregory, VP Shelf Intelligence at Nielsen. We all, again, know the headaches of the shelf, and Patty and Matt are hopefully going to help us through some of those. You two, I'm going to send this presentation your way, and you can kind of get started with letting us know yourselves, your companies, and next. It's coming your way. Thanks again for helping us out this morning, Patty and Matt.
Thanks, Marty.
And it looks good. It's full screen. It looks, well, it's not full screen yet, but.
Okay.
I want to remind everybody to please put yourselves on mute as you come in the door.
Okay. Thank you, Marty. Thank you, everyone. My name is Matt Holland. As Marty mentioned, I'm the commercial leader for North America for the Trax-Nielsen Alliance on the Trax side. I'm joined here by Patty Gregory. Patty is a vice president of the Shelf Intelligence Solution for Nielsen and my counterpart with the Nielsen component of the Alliance. We wanted to really jump right in this morning and talk a little bit about some of the challenges that we see in the industry today, especially when it comes to understanding what's happening at shelf. And I think we can all, if you've been in the industry for a while, if you've worked in category management, sales, any sort of customer-facing role, you may have been in situations where you have some new items that you need to cut in on shelf, and you're not quite sure first where those are supposed to go. If it's a one-in, one-out sort of policy, you're working with a particular customer, whether you have some facings that you can work with or whether you have to delist items in order to make room for those new products. You may not know exactly where they should be placed in terms of the optimal shelving position for that product. And then once it actually is placed, you may not actually know, if that was done in the way that you expected. We also see competitive encroachment, right? And customers looking at new items and looking at brands and constantly trying to understand, how do I, generate that best mix? You may be faced with delistments and need to kind of create a defense story for your products. And when you try to do these things, you often realize that in order to be able to get a good reading at the shelf, traditionally, you would have to go out, with an audit force, probably start a 12-week program where you go out and manually scan the products at the shelf, get that data back. You may have to manually combine that information with sales and profitability. And what this really leads to is an environment where you can't really react. You can't be agile as an organization because you don't have that ongoing understanding of what's happening at shelf. So that's really what we're here to talk to you about today. Because we know, even with all of the trends going on with e-commerce, that still in FMCG or CPG categories, at most 10% of the business is running through e-commerce. The majority is still in brick and mortar. And we need to work to make sure that that part of our business is as efficient and as effective as possible. And especially at the moment of truth, right? We know that, based on the path to purchase, that customers, clients come in, right, or shoppers come in, and they may have an idea about what brand they want, the category they shop, but a lot of the actual SKU level purchase decisions are still made at shelf, okay? And so understanding all of this and kind of thinking about, the way that this existed in the past, this is really kind of the crux for why Nielsen and Trax have come together to bring this new solution into the market. So let's talk about that a little bit more. So kind of understanding again, what's happening at shelf. We see, this situation kind of not getting better, right, over time. The shelves are crowded, right? So on average, over 30,000 items in a typical grocery store. We know that SKU growth continues to outpace volume growth, meaning more items are being added to the shelf than are actually moving each year. And FMI continues to measure the impact of all of these changes and the crowding of the shelves in terms of out of stocks. And 8% is the number that they've used for the past several years. If you think about the size of the total FMCG business, that's roughly $54 billion a year in lost opportunity due to out of stocks. And we just see this continuing, right, in terms of a new product race to continually get new items out there, right? Shoppers and consumers want to see innovation in the category. And a lot of times that's how you continue to build your presence on the shelf and continue to innovate to grow your brands. And what we see is, when companies start moving away from, this legacy or this traditional kind of 1 or 2 time per year audit, when you do have the ability to continuously measure what's happening at the shelf and understand those shelf conditions relative to sales and what it means for your business in terms of fixing some of these, issues, whether it be, incorrect placement, and out of stocks, or just other elements that might be driving your sales down, we see that companies that do use this data, both on an ongoing basis as well as inputs into modeling, which we'll talk about in a minute, to help with planogram design, that they do see an average of 3 to 5% uplift in stores where they've made changes, where they've fixed their merchandising, and where they've planned and executed better shelf design. And in this environment today in the United States and CPG, we're often looking at maybe 1, 2, 3% growth. So 3 to 5% uplift can just be huge for any particular category or brand. So let's talk for a minute about what we're doing. In order to be able to bring this to market, we really are bringing the best of what 3 companies are bringing to this alliance, right? So Trax, which we'll talk about a little bit more in a minute in terms of technology, brings this computer vision platform, this image recognition that allows us to very efficiently snap pictures of the shelf in the store and convert those images to data, which helps us understand which products are on the shelf and how they're merchandised. We combine that information with Nielsen sales data at the store level, which allows us to understand, of course, how those shelf conditions impact performance. And then finally, we're leveraging Acosta as our feet on the street in order to be able to make sure that we can most efficiently get in the store and capture the image of the shelf in order to be able to power this entire enterprise. And so a couple of moments here we're going to spend on the technology, because it's important to understand that there's been really breakthroughs in image recognition technology over the past several years. Trax holds about 40 patents in this space. We bring something called fine grain image recognition. And in the past, we saw image recognition across a number of different industries and a number of different applications. And it's been around for a few years, and it works well to try to understand, large kind of changes and objects and images in terms of teaching a computer how to recognize certain things, right? And the issue with that, though, is you really need to become much more granular. So what Trax does is we actually go down to the pixel level. We try to understand subtle changes in color and composition of different photos to overcome some of the issues that happen when you try to apply this technology to the CPG space. Because we know out there's a lot of products that look really nearly identical, right? So this product in front of you today is a 20-ounce plastic bottle of Coca-Cola Classic. But if you didn't kind of understand the relative size of this bottle, or perhaps the height or the width, you might think this could be a 1-liter bottle. This could be a 2-liter bottle, okay? And we also understand that there's reflective packaging, right? There are things like obstructions in the stores, right? There are products that are behind plastic guards if they have particular security concerns. And we know when you snap pictures, you don't always get the best angle, right? And so the algorithms that we've built in our fine grain image recognition engine allow us to overcome some of these challenges to get to, on average, about 96% accuracy, which is really just fantastic in the industry and allows us to power this sort of shelf intelligence solution with a lot of confidence in terms of the quality that we can provide to clients. Now, once we, snap individual images of products, okay, and we use our recognition engine to identify what that product is, how big that product is in terms of its spatial dimensions, okay. So we know it's a Coke Classic, for example. We know it's a bottle, not a can. We know it's plastic, not glass. All of these things, right? We can start getting down to individual UPCs. In addition to that, we take all of those individual photos and we pull them together into a realogram. So we do what's called panoramic stitching. And what this does is we do small overlaps with each one of our photos. We guide through our application and a bit of augmented reality the Acosta rep in the store to essentially snap these pictures in a particular way, which just allows us to really recreate a digital representation of the shelf. And this is important because it allows us to not just understand the products that we recognize, as I mentioned a minute ago, but the context in which those products sit, right? So the number of shelves, the number of 4-foot bays, the type of gondola, the overall size of the set, and really the spatial location of the product on the shelf, okay? And also look at things like out of stocks, calculate measures like share of shelf, fair share, these kinds of things to allow us to get to the common KPIs that all of us know and use when we try to understand how well we're doing in the store. And so, once we have those shelf images and we've processed them, we're able then to take all of those individual products that we recognize for every single SKU in the entire category and combine that with that POS data from Nielsen. And then we render that information into a visualization tool, which will show you in a couple of minutes, which allows you as the user to go in and really mine that data very deeply and understand where your opportunities might be to improve your conditions at shelf and therefore the performance of your brand. Ultimately, we want then for that analysis to be activated, right? We know that it's great to do good analysis and to understand what's happening in terms of measurement of your products at shelf, but ultimately the value you're going to see is in activating those insights, working back with your customer teams and with your retailer partners. And so let's talk a little bit about the Shelf Intelligence Suite. So this is a newer service we launched in July. We've already up and running on several categories with several clients. And the two main components of the service are what we're calling Shelf Pulse and Shelf Blueprint, okay? And we'll focus on Shelf Pulse here for a minute. And this is this idea, again, as I mentioned at the beginning, of this continuous measurement of the shelf, okay? A monthly audit of a representative sample of stores that allow us to look at over 20 retailers, okay, and understand what's happening at the shelf with your products in your categories and with your competition, okay? We'll talk in a minute about Shelf Blueprint, how you'll go into that a little bit more deeply. So, as I mentioned a minute ago, really Shelf Pulse is all about this idea of continuous improvement, okay? It's great to go out once a year and do a reset, okay? We know that helps clean up a lot of problems at shelf. It would be even better if we could track our compliance against that new planogram. If we could understand on a monthly basis, what are those opportunities you see in terms of optimizing the shelf in order to be able to grow your sales, right? So understanding those shelving conditions, your sales, your item productivity, and not just for your products, but for competitors, because as we know, when you're trying to bring insights into a customer, you have to have that category perspective. You have to be able to say, look, this is important for my brand, but this is also what we can do for your category, okay? The second piece is, because we're capturing this information through image recognition technology, right? We have visual proof of these conditions. So in the past, when you would see something wonky coming in from data that might come from an auditor, a lot of times the retailer, the salesperson, I mean, especially if this data is used for incentive purposes, can be very skeptical, right? And say, look, I don't believe that's what's actually happening. And the reality is, in some cases, we do know that, mistakes happen in terms of collection. Here, you're going to have a picture to prove that this is the way that the consumers are actually seeing the shelf, and this is what's actually driving your sales in terms of those conditions, okay? So that's another big component in terms of the benefit that we see of this service. And then lastly, the shelf quality index. So this is a new metric that Trax and Nielsen are bringing to market, and this is being used to really take into account a lot of the key metrics or KPIs that a lot of companies use today to measure the goodness of their shelves. So they're looking at out of stocks or on-shelf availability. They're looking at things like your share of shelf, your fair share index, your SKU productivity per facing, to try to understand the goodness of your performance in terms of those shelf conditions. The shelf quality index takes in as input all of those metrics, right? And allows us to report out one number, which can give you kind of an understanding of how well you're doing and benchmark that versus your competition, or benchmark your brand across retailers. So you get a very quick picture of where you may have opportunities to grow. And then we also provide data that helps you understand how to improve this index and therefore your sales, because the idea is the sales quality index is directly related to your performance, or the shelf quality index is directly related to your performance, and therefore improving your SQI will improve your sales, okay? So rather than go through a slide on each one of those components, we're gonna jump right in. I'm going to do a quick demonstration of the tool for you live here today. Okay, hopefully everyone can see this.
Yes, we can. Shelf Pulse.
Thank you. Okay, so this is the Shelf Pulse dashboard. So this is a proprietary set of dashboards that Trax has created that leverages, again, both that image recognition, image processed shelf data, okay, as well as an integration built in of the Nielsen POS with those associated products and the associated stores within our panel, okay? Here, we're looking at the coffee database. In August, we have the ability, if we'd like, to filter on different categories. If you have a portfolio of multiple categories and brands, also different cycles, because again, this is about a continuous reading of the market. And so what you want to be able to do is not just understand the point in time opportunities, but the trends as well. If you're focusing on a particular retailer with a particular program, you should see improvement in performance over time. If you're not, then there's something else going on that we might need to dive deeper into. On top, this really is some of the key KPIs that we see clients using the most. So, what is your standard share of shelf? This is going to be across the entire United States, all of our stores in the sample, which include a representative sample, again, of the major retailers in food, drug, mass, value or dollar channel, okay? And we're also expanding into C-store next month. We also see something called missing on shelf. Missing on shelf is actually a combination of out of stocks and what we would call voids, right? Out of stocks in our terminology have a tag and voids do not. Again, because we have a continuous collection in the same set of stores over time, we know what was in that slot, in that space that we need to fill last month, right? We know based on Nielsen's product list what products should be selling in that store. And so we can very well understand when we see a hole in the set, what products should be there and assign that to your particular brand to help you understand what we call missing on shelf. Here's your overall SQI score that I spoke a minute ago, as well as promotions and the overall category sales. Then from an SQI perspective, we break this down in a way that helps us understand from a regional perspective what's happening, in this case, state by state, okay? And then we have the top 5 manufacturers in the category. This is a demo database with live image recognition data and some dummy sales data, okay? And we're looking at coffee, okay? And so you can go in, for example, in Texas, Marty's home state, and understand what your SQI score is. On the top right, you can understand what your market share is in terms of your share of shelf, okay? So in this case, we see that overall Smucker's is about an 18.3, Folgers, which is their major brand, is at a 12.8%, okay? If we wanted to go much deeper, we can click on that and go actually into the individual SKUs, okay? Or we can quickly come back out, just look at the brands, come out again, look at all of the brands. We can toggle both on share of shelf as well as share of sales. Within share of sales, it also gives us our fair share index, all right? On the bottom, we have really a digital representation of the vertical position of all the products that are assigned each of the manufacturers on each shelf, okay? We normalize the data that we see in the market to 6 shelves, okay? And here, what you see in terms of facings is, these are the percentage of SKUs or facings, or by facing, that Starbucks, for example, is enjoying at each level of the shelf, right? So 19% of all Starbucks facings in our sample for the month of August were at eye level, okay? 19% were at the top level, right? Then if we want to understand the relative performance of those SKUs at the different levels of the shelf, because we understand that vertical positioning on the shelf is important, then we can go over and toggle to sales and get an understanding of what that looks like as well, okay? And then on the right, we have category news. This is an exception-driven engine that allows us to go out and pull news articles in from the net, as well as look at trends in the data itself and help us understand what might be happening of note in the system and give you a little bit of an idea about maybe where to start digging in terms of your most recent update and opportunities. So that was really the executive summary of the start page. We also have something called category landscape. And category landscape allows us to really look more deeply at some of the key KPIs, as well as start to see some of the images associated with those KPIs. Because while in this version of Shelf Pulse, which is at our aggregate, unbiased, representative panel level, we are not exposing individual stores. We certainly want you to be able to see the images associated with some of these conditions. And so I talked a minute ago about the main measurements. So you can look at your SQI score across the key competitors. In terms of manufacturers, you can look at that trend over time. You can look at your fair share, your sales by facing, so a productivity number, your share of shelf, again, missing on shelf, and also unique distribution. So these are not an average number of items selling, but your actual items on the shelf, okay? So this is not counting facings, this is counting the individual SKUs that are truly unique, okay? Again, we have a representation of the share of shelf, and then we also have here the ability to start looking at the actual products associated with some of the conditions that we're seeing, okay? So in this case, and by the way, we're not just doing this for the primary shelf, we're doing this for all locations of this category in the store, okay? So we are tracking and measuring displays, end caps, clip strips, all sorts of secondary locations in addition to your primary shelf. So in this case, if we wanted to understand a little bit more deeply what was going on in terms of display and you were Starbucks, then you could look at in Texas, in a brochure, right? In the middle of August, this was the display you got in aisle, right? And it looks like it's exclusive, which is great because it looks like something that Starbucks paid a lot of money for. We understand the price. We can see if you're out of stock. And when we click on the brand, what we're actually seeing here with these targets is the image recognition engine confirming that it has recognized every product on this display down to the SKU level. Okay? Again, getting back to that accuracy. Now, if we look through some of the other examples, again, we don't want to expose the individual stores, but we want to provide you with that visual proof. So these particular images are all geo-time-stamped, meaning they are associated with the stores in the panel, whatever filtering you're using on retailer, and by time period. Okay, so these are going to give you actual examples, again, without exposing the stores, of what you're seeing in the data. Okay, and then just a moment here, I want to find a planogram where you'll see the whole shelf. There we go. So here is, again, now we're in Minnesota. So this is an example of a grocer in Minnesota on the day before the last audit period. And here we see a full-size set. And we see this stitched together panoramic image. And hey, we can very much look in and go, wow, okay. We've got some out of stocks here on the top shelf. These are big items. They should be probably able to be stocked better. And we also see some things we understand about flow. Here's a store that has a bulk section built in. If that's part of your business and that's something you want to understand more, you can. And then the final thing that we're doing here that's important is we can understand from these tags here what your price is, right? Whether the product is on promotion. And that's obviously critical when we're trying to understand things like out of stock and other situations, because a lot of times, and probably a majority of the situations, we see out of stocks in some ways impacted by your promotional schedule, right? Which gets back to this idea of not only monitoring what's happening, but perhaps planning, if it's a heavily promoted product, to have more holding power for these items in the future, if this is something that you're going to be doing on a regular basis in terms of the promotions. And again, finally, if you're a particular brand, you can go out and look at your particular products. Let's say, again, we're Dunkin' Donuts and Folgers, and we want to see where we're at in the shelf, okay? So you can very easily do that. And it's very easy to kind of right mouse click, save those images down to a PowerPoint presentation if you'd like to with some of these metrics. And again, create that simple one-page example that you can bring into a particular customer. A couple more things I wanted to mention here. We do, as I said a minute ago, track secondary displays and locations in the store, as well as point of sale materials, as evidenced by those tags on the shelf. And so in this example up here, this is actually your share of shelf on display. Okay, so probably important depending on how much you're spending. We know trade is, after cost of goods, usually the second largest expense of any major CPG manufacturer, right? And then did want to go a little bit more deeply here. We do have a way to say, okay, then that's great. Matt, Trax-Nielsen, you guys are doing a great job at that high level. I need to understand this kind of nitty-gritty detail. And so what we allow in this tool is really a lot of drilling and filtering capability to be able to go down in and say, okay, it's great to understand my share of shelf or my share on display of this particular brand, but I want to understand now all the individual items underneath that in order to be able to make some decisions about what I need to do. And here we see we can sort this very simply by the average number of facings. And we see, for example, if you're Keurig, here's one of your most heavily faced items, your sales by facing in terms of productivity, okay? And in this particular set of filters, once we get past that executive summary screen, we can start looking not just at the overall category or your brand, we can recreate your product hierarchy that you might have with Nielsen, so we can look at your particular segments and the way that you view the category. We can, again, look across time, and we can also look at particular geographies and the full set of retailers that we have available in the panel, okay? And then finally, what we want to talk about here is, the other piece of this, which we call store level visibility or shelf activation. And, it's good to be able to understand what's happening at an overall level in the market and even at the retailer level over time with some of the key metrics you want to track. But if you want to activate those insights, we've also have a service which we're doing in parallel with this. We're going out and collecting a number of stores that go into this aggregate panel, and then also individual stores which we expose to you through this tool in terms of their shelving conditions, which allow you to give specific direction to your brokers or your DSD sales force to say, here's an issue at a particular store, go fix this, okay? And so in this example, again, we're in coffee, we're in the month of August. We see that this particular location, this is a super value related store called Super One Foods. This is in Wisconsin. And what we do is essentially tell you exactly where the store was, okay, in terms of location, all the images that we've shot there, we set up with you, or we put together our standard set of KPIs. In this case, it's share of shelf, distribution, and out of stocks, okay, in terms of the conditions within that particular store. We aggregate those by manufacturer, and then we actually give you the individual pictures and scenes that we've snapped within that store on that visit, okay? And in this way, you can take that high-level measurement down to specific action and allow more direction in terms of making sure that you're being most efficient and effective, with that instruction out to the field in terms of improving and fixing merchandising on shelf. Okay. So, switching back to the presentation now. Our scope today looks like this. Okay, we have again food, drug, mass, and value retailers. We are adding major chains and independents to represent the total C-store universe within the next month as well. We have the ability to expand this into additional channels that may make sense. We also have the ability in the activation feature in terms of store level visibility to expand the number of stores within particular retailers if you have a heavy up program that you might be doing with Walmart or any other major retailer that you might be working with. We offer this solution in 2 tiers. One is tier 1, which is just the measurement. So this is what we saw at the beginning, this high-level aggregate view, and it allows us to look at, again, that Nielsen designed representative sample of those retailers on the left, get monthly updates, full category capture. The integration with the POS data is built in, and you get the 5 standard dashboards that I was mentioning and showing you a minute ago. We also have optional features to do specific display tracking, new item speed to shelf, and planogram compliance monitoring. And then the other piece that I mentioned before is the store level visibility. So again, getting those shelf insights at the individual store level and also being able to do things like planogram compliance and monitoring. Here's kind of a little bit more about what that looks like. And we just discussed this, so I'm not going to repeat it. All right, now I'm going to hand it off to Patty, and she's going to talk to you a little bit more about what we do with this data as an input into predictive modeling.
Thanks, Matt. So Matt talked to us a lot about how shelf pulse can really enable a very powerful measurement of what is. But with shelf blueprint, we're concerning ourselves more with what could be and what should be. And we do this, as Matt said, through predictive modeling. So using analytic modeling, we first try and quantify the impact of shelf drivers. We do this by controlling for other things going on in the store at the same time, like promotions and pricing conditions. And then we take that understanding of what really works at shelf, and we use it to develop winning merchandising principles. This helps us and helps manufacturers understand what really works at shelf, what should be the right flow, facing, positioning, adjacencies. And with those principles, then, we use them as an input to create an ideal shelf blueprint, a blockogram, if you will, that helps us understand how the shelf should ideally be merchandised. What's great about that, though, is it's not static. We can actually adjust it and understand size of prize, and I'll show you a little bit more what that looks like. The building blocks, the foundation of this is really that image recognition technology that Matt showed you that enables us to do this sort of measurement continuously across many stores. That gives us a rich data source upon which to build our models. It enables us to look at changes across stores and also changes within stores over time. It also enables us to get to a deeper level of granularity, down to the SKU level depth, which is important when you're trying to make decisions about trade-offs of different locations and facings. And finally, our global reach. Trax is a global company, Nielsen is a global company, and that gives us the flexibility and the potential to do this type of analytics service across more markets, key markets for global manufacturers. This is an example of shelf drivers and an example of what some of the modeling output could actually look like. Here we're looking specifically at sales per store based on shelf position. This is now the vertical, and we also have the horizontal positions. And we can understand from this which positions on the shelf really optimize your sales. And by making some recommended changes about merchandising your key items in key locations, we can actually drive sales per store significantly. In this example, it was a 14% increase. The modeling that we do results in key principles. So we saw shelf location as one example of that, but we iterate on these models to understand what are the key elements of shelf design that actually drive improvements in the shelf overall. And we establish principles, for example, what to anchor the set with, where to position a particular brand. And importantly, we turn these into estimates of the size of prize. So if you look over to the right, we take these principles and quantify what is it worth to chase that opportunity in a given channel or a given customer, so that you can prioritize where you put your efforts to get the most impact from the analytics. The output of all of this modeling is this shelf blueprint you see here. And what you can see is we're recommending a certain flow and a certain layout to the shelf. And what's really powerful about this is it's not static. So we're estimating the size of prize for this ideal shelf, but you can make adjustments to it in real time and understand on the fly if you're space constrained, if you're working with a smaller format store, for instance, and you don't have this type of room, you can shrink the different sections, or you can remove facings, and you can understand right away what that new design would be worth.
Okay, so that was really what we wanted to share with you today. And thank you, Patty, for walking through the shelf blueprint piece. You saw also our shelf pulse component. You saw a demo of the Trax system. And now we'll open it up for questions.
Thank you so much, you guys. And yeah, if you will just leave your slide on this. So if people want to contact Matt or Patricia or Patty, we can, you've got your emails right there. Thank you so much. There is so much information on shelf intelligence. I mean, I'm not saying anything new to anybody. If you've got questions or comment, please head to the chat room and we'll take questions from there. Again, thank you guys for so much information. There is one question. There's a couple. And I think you did bring this up at the end of it, but you're starting out with retailers in the food, drug, mass, and value. Do you have the ability to visit other types of store types?
Yes, the short answer is yes. And one of the reasons we wanted to leverage our partnership with Acosta is that they have a huge, field force that is in, really a number of different stores today. So, we are focused primarily on the CPG space, right? But, if you are a beverage company, perhaps an alcoholic beverage company, you want to go into liquor stores. If you are a snacks or candy company, you want to go into C-stores, as we mentioned, we do have the ability to expand our reach and go into additional channels and retailers based on your need.
Well, and just as Patty showed, you've got ways for the smaller stores too to work with. So I like that when she was talking about shrinking it and making it for smaller.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And again, if you've got questions or comment, please head to the chat room. If you've got questions for Matt and Patty. And again, this may have been something brought up earlier, but you know how it is. You get in these and there's things really go by. There's so much entailed. Do you have the ability to handle custom KPIs and survey questions?
Yes, we do. So we recognize, although we've built a standard set of dashboards that we feel will satisfy 90% of clients' needs. That many clients, especially larger companies, have very particular key performance indicators or KPIs that they use. They may be calculated a certain way. They may want to say, based on the principles that Patty showed. Hey, I want to understand what my percentage of stores is where I have at least this much space. So the good thing is when we capture the data through image recognition, it's all there. And so what we basically do in the background is then take some of that raw data and understand where your brand or items may be meeting those KPI conditions, and we can report out a lot of different variation around KPIs depending on your needs. In some cases, we would render those in the system. In other cases, we would provide reporting for you as well. But that's absolutely part of the service.
And with so many of our clients having well-developed perfect store programs, a lot of our clients have very specific ideas about the kinds of KPIs they want to look at. So we know we need to accommodate that. That's
exactly right. And then in terms of custom questions, we do have the ability, because all of the Acosta reps have the Trax application on their handheld devices. We have the ability to, while they're in the store, send them survey questions should that be necessary. I will say that part of the idea of leveraging image recognition is you can actually cut out a lot of that survey work that had been done in the past, because you're going to get it right from the image itself. So for example, there may be questions you would send out in the past to say, tell me what segment or what brand leads the aisle flow. Well, I don't need to ask you that anymore. I can see it, right, in terms of using this technology. So we do leverage the technology probably to cut out 80% of that. But if you do have questions to say, hey, how many locations in the store do I have a display if I'm a gum or candy client, right? Where is my product shelved if I'm, on a clip strip and, I'm trying to get some cross merchandising or promotion going on with another brand in my portfolio. These kinds of things we can, of course, put into a custom survey question, send out to the auditor and collect either one time or on a regular basis, along with the overall image capture that we're doing while we're in the store.
Perfect, thank you. Question, how do you handle package graphic changes with the image recognition?
So that's a great question. And so we have something called Brand Watch, which is a program, an algorithm within our system, which essentially helps us understand two things. One, new items, right? We know new items are launched every month, and we need to flag where we see those new items and set those aside to make sure we're recognizing those correctly and we're assigning the appropriate sales to them. So when a new product comes in, we have the ability to quickly recognize that and go through a separate process to ensure that it's coded correctly. The other thing that we see is kind of promotional items and pack changes. Some categories run 50% free product, things like this, or they may just go through a package change. We have the ability to assign, because we know those things don't happen cleanly. You'll have some stores with the old package, some stores with the new. We have the ability to assign multiple images to a particular UPC code, okay, to a particular product, as well as recognize some of the fine changes that we actually see on pack, and again flag those as either a change or new. This also works a lot better working together with Nielsen, because of course we see all of the sales data for the products in those stores in those weeks, which allows us to do even a triple check of that. But the good thing I think overall that you need to know is we're processing as Trax globally about 7 million images a day, and we have a global product database where we've recognized 8 billion products, okay, across 45 countries. And this allows us really to have a really, really good base to work from in terms of making sure that we're constantly keeping up to date with all the changes to the products in the market. It's absolutely critical to the service.
Another question, are you able to disclose at this time which C stores you'll be starting to include next month? Interesting.
So as a general rule, we don't disclose particular stores that we go to that are part of our measurement panel. And we do this intentionally because what we don't want to do is we don't want anybody to particularly tend to the stores that are in the sample, right? We want the KPI measurement to be really objective and unbiased, and that's really important. So what we will tell you is which chains we're going into, for instance, and estimate of the number of stores that we'll be using to cover the universe, but we don't disclose the particular stores.
And I'll just add that, like the food, drug, and mass portion of our panel, we go after the largest, most important retailers. And assuming we have the appropriate sample, we can break those retailers out and provide that data to you retailer by retailer. So it should be, a lot of the usual suspects you would expect within that channel, as well as major independents.
I appreciate it very much, and I guess that's going to kind of answer too is this something that you're launching right now, or is it available right now, or is it just in the launch stages of it?
No, we're live.
Okay.
So we've started back in July.
Got it.
Live in food, drug, and mass. We're expanding into other categories and channels based on client interest.
Got it. I really do so appreciate you helping everybody with the steps to help everybody at Shelf. Are there any last thoughts from either or both of you?
No, just don't hesitate to reach out to us. You've got that and my contact information. We're happy to meet with folks individually to have more in-depth discussions that are more particular to your business and your specific program to see how we can help.
Yeah, and I would just say the last thing I'd probably leave folks with is, this is a new capability in the market, right? And we recognize in the past that, folks did this maybe periodically 1 or 2 times a year. But if you think about your real business needs and the ability to be responsive and agile to customer requests, this sort of data is really gold. I mean, being able to understand, what your conditions are at shelf, what might be driving your sales, modeling what the size of the prize might be in terms of helping to understand how you should be setting your shelf. This is just information that we didn't have before. And it's really important, obviously, with everything going on with bricks and mortar retailers, that we just get as efficient and effective as possible with what we're doing in order to make sure that we improve our performance and create an experience for shoppers that obviously gets them to the highest level conversion, the largest basket size, et cetera, in order to be able to drive, not just sales for your brand, but for the category.
Matt, so well said. Matt, Patty, thank you so much for all this information. Again, people, you can contact Matt and Patty at on their websites there, or at their emails, or go through member services at CMA. We'll be happy to hook you up. Thank you again for everybody for joining us, for all the information, and have a good weekend.
Thank you.
Thanks.